Okay, welcome everyone. It is August 19th, 2024. It is our 9 a.m. strategic planning meeting. Let the record reflect that we have 4 commissioners that are present here in the room this morning. We have some guests that we'll be talking to in just a moment. So we have Commissioner Kearns, Commissioner French, Commissioner Jordan, and Commissioner Cuny are here present in the boardroom, along with our executive management team. And so we will go ahead and get started. And I'm going to let Commissioner French go ahead and do the introductions for our first item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this morning, we are joined by Mr. John Hemmingson with Lakeside Realty to talk about a proposal that they have for the Old Corral property. If you remember, when we were dealing with the Old Corral, initially we were hoping to drive both commercial as well as residential into the property. But now that we have Jim Frank doing his project over at Meadworks, the dynamics with regard to the market on the north side have changed a little bit and stuff. And so I met with Mr. Hemmingson and his team here a couple weeks ago, and they would like to present to the board a counter proposal that they have for developing the property, which will also require us to, we agree with it, to get rid of one of the conditions in the deed that we placed in there and stuff. So this morning we have Mr. John Hemmingson with us, Dave Naran, Valen Glasser, Gabe Gallinger, and Melissa Wells. And so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We've been reviewing this property for a number of years and what the highest and best use we feel is for the property. I realized at the time, it was before Greenstone's incredible project they're doing on the north side, and the aspiration of the county commissioners was something more like a Kendall Yards type environment up there, but it's not quite large enough for that being a total of 40 acres. And we've been looking at, we have to move about 600,000 yards of dirt on that site to make it viable. And we've come up with another idea of a really high need for the community, and feel it would be much better for the county and to serve our, our public. And that is assisted living, senior living type community up there. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to my team that's been working on it for Lakeside Companies, and let them explain what they have in mind. And I think it would be good for everyone to give a little bit of background. Valerie has deep knowledge in this space and has done a lot of these projects over the years, so she can answer a lot of detailed questions as to what it would be all about.
So I think to kick it off, Dave, if you would want to just give a little bit of overview to the location so everyone's familiar, and then just a little bit about the topography of the site. So that's why we have the townhomes that are on it. And then Valerie will give an overview of everything pertaining to all the senior housing that we're proposing.
So I'm Gabe Gallinger. I'm a civil engineer with Lakeside. I'm in-house. We do all of our engineering in-house. We've looked at this property for some years now, different options, potential. Grading has shown itself as a significant factor. It was a gravel pit for 50, 70 years. And so a lot of material has left the site. We've got to rebalance it to accommodate all of these things, road grades, utilities, and those types of things. So this site sits just west of 395, north of Farwell Road. If you're familiar with Mead High School, it's just to the northeast of Mead High School. It's directly west of Twigs if you go to the north side. Big gravel area, good soil, great opportunity, infill development. I think it's going to be very special for the north side of Spokane and Spokane County. We've got solutions for water. We've got solutions for sewer. We have a perimeter road. Access to this site is one of the constraints. It's limited to the 2 accesses shown on Farwell Road. They line up with existing streets, so that, and that's required to have the number of units that we're contemplating in here. So we have a perimeter road that actually goes up around the edge to the north edge and the west edge of the site. Those will be elevated view lots, very nice. Set up above, and then you can see we have a trail system that kind of bisects that upper ridge from the lower, what we'll call the level. It's not a hole. You think of the gravel pit as a really deep hole. When we're done grading it, it won't seem like that at all. But we do have some topography from the upper ridge to the bottom. And then the remainder out to Farwell, where we're showing the assisted living, active adult cottages. Will be fairly level, 2 to 3% grade. So really nothing that would be out of place for a development like this.
Thank you. And I think that is a great segue in for, again, our new vision is incorporating all of this senior housing type product. We have a couple of different ones. So Valerie, if you want to discuss what those entail.
Yeah, and I'll just give it a little brief. I'm Valerie Glasser, and I have 35 years experience in senior housing and assisted living and skilled care administration, management, operations. And we are partnering with Lakeside Capital with our new ideas on this property, and we have multiple facilities that we have planned for multiple locations. This is one of them. They would be called the Hemmingson, and at each location, it would be the Hemmingson at North Quarter, the Hemmingson at Coeur d'Alene, that type of thing. We envision for this property a multi-use for 136 units of a multi-story senior living. That would be independent living. 26 cottages that are also independent senior living, and then 80-bed assisted living. They're on the right-hand side of the map. The assisted living is, we have 3 different levels of care in our assisted living, and it's more of a residential feel for that particular product. 5 homes that house 80 residents, and like Gabe said, that is more of the flatter site of the property. And so because we obviously have residents in wheelchairs and walkers and things. The senior product with the multi-level and the independent cottages are more independent type seniors that range from anywhere from 70 years on up is the average. And that would be a multi-story, 3 different buildings that are connected in a way, and then the senior cottages. The senior cottages would have services such as housekeeping. We do have daily checks. They would be able to utilize some of the community services inside the multi-level story buildings, such as the weight room, etc. And then we envision something a little bit different that is happening in the industry. That is having the main floor of the multi-story buildings, having more of a commercial style retail units, coffee shop that's accessible to the public, as well as maybe a medical facility, a therapy clinic, that type of use for that main floor that would also enable our residents of the community to utilize those services. And we found that in other projects around the country, that's very popular. It's kind of a wave of the future, is involving the public with our senior populace. And they enjoy it, our public enjoys it, and that's kind of our vision for the property.
Okay. So now that we all have a little background and overview, the next steps are we want to visit about the deed restrictions that are currently on the property. And I did pass out a handful of packets of them and highlighted a few areas. So in reference 1, for example, the first part discusses that no less than 20% of the total developable surface area shall be developed as commercial development. So again, given what Al had discussed with the location of our property and with need works and whatnot, we wanted to visit the opportunity of a modification to the restrictions so that we could proceed with a plan similar to what we've discussed.
Do you have that as Ron? Is that?
What happened, sorry, what were you asking?
She's wondering whether we had this as a PowerPoint.
Oh, yes, they do, yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, it's, I've highlighted a packet and handed out, it's the same thing, I just highlighted a few areas, so. On item number 1, starting with the second sentence, that's where it discusses the 20% on the deed restriction for the commercial.
You notice that they do have some retail and some other functions in their master plan, but it just doesn't hit that 20% mark yet.
And I would like to point out as well as when you get into assisted living, you're talking 24/7, 365 day a year. Medical care essentially, and I look at it totally as an operating business, not necessarily a real estate business. You need the buildings, but it's all about the care, it's high level of care. You know, to me, it's quite commercial in its nature. I believe another thing about the deed restriction is it was set up to be by partial development.
Right, so another component is that on the deed restriction, it also says that every single phase needs to have 20% commercial. So number 1, we wanted to just visit about the opportunity to reduce or eliminate that commercial deed restriction. And then as a follow-up to that, depending on what that conversation looks like, we definitely want to know if that can be an inclusive number. So let's say we front load it and it's done all up front. Would that be acceptable as opposed to doing it per phase, where in some locations it's simply just not going to make sense. Let's say we did townhouses in the back of the property, the very last, it would really be an appropriate place to put commercial. So, but I think first we wanted to see if there'd be some conversation about just the nature of the 20%.
So if you remember back to when we started to look at the sale of the what's the old Corral property, at the time we were hoping for something that would be mixed use and would generate some revenue for the county coming back as opposed to just strictly residential and stuff. And so this does part of that, not all of it. But when we did the deed restriction, we structured it in a way to where we knew that we'd be coming back and doing some kind of modifications to the deed to meet with whatever the market condition presented itself with. And so now we've got a proposal that develops out the entire property, but a little bit differently than what we envisioned. But the market has changed, with what Jim Frank is doing over at the Mead Works and some of the other developments going to be driven over there. There's just not enough market to support all of that. So is this a reasonable alternative to what was originally envisioned is the question.
And as John mentioned, that if we look at the assisted living, which is over on the right side of the map, again, more commercial in nature, I believe it employs around 50 or so people. So it operates more such in a commercial fashion than just a straight up residential.
Right, it's definitely a medical facility, but an assisted living residential setting, so. But it is a healthcare facility.
So, and I think our original purpose was trying to get that retail sales tax generating, since it's county property. And within the county, getting that was the purpose of having it be commercial, was to generate the sales tax revenue from it.
Yeah.
Since it was county property, we're selling it, we wanted to make sure that there's some kind of revenue coming back, as Commissioner French just said. And I think too, it was also to try to get, we knew we needed housing, in different housing stock for Spokane County. So I was looking at that as well, which is that what your exterior, is that for anyone, or is that just for like a 55 and older kind of?
The exterior would be for anyone, the townhouses for that.
And would you be leasing those or would you be selling those?
So
Yeah, they're probably selling them.
Okay, so that's kind of for me, one of the things that we're missing in Spokane County right now is having that ability for someone to buy that first home or condo, or townhome to give them the opportunity to start to build that, equity, for them to be able to do other things and build their, start to build their wealth versus just doing apartments that aren't helping those individuals. So,
That's kind of the beauty of this product is that we're not only supplying what is needed right now in the senior community, but we're engaging the public and the other homes to be a full community and campus together. So we found that it's just been so productive to place these type of facilities in a residential, surrounded by a residential feel to incorporate our residents with engaging with just regular, public and residential housing, so.
And they do make an interesting point with regard to, commercial development is a broad category. And assisted living fits within that broader category and stuff. And so if you accept that as part of this, then, they're very close to that 20% threshold with regard to commercial activity. It's not retail, but there is some retail incorporated in here. But in terms of the overall mix, we're getting close.
I would say if you look at the right hand where the assisted living in, going up to the top part with the red, we're pretty close to 5 acres right there. The deed restriction, it's actually, it's 7 acres, not quite a full 20%. There's recognition of the topography of the site, so.
Well, the other aspect of it is that there's a requirement that a certain percentage of it be dedicated to, 10% for green space. And I think you actually exceed the 10% green space in this configuration, which would lend to more opportunity for interaction with the folks there.
yeah, I guess that would be one of the questions because the over by where you have the townhomes, that's a smaller green space. I'm assuming you'd be having to use the assisted living part as part of your green space, which seems like that would be more off limits, so that the rest of the people could use that. Is that correct?
The front area of the assisted living is all accessible by the public. The courtyards between, we do have those fenced in a secured area for our residents. We do take care of residents with memory care and memory issues. But we like to engage our residents and be able to see out in the public areas and watch the dogs walk by and that type of thing. And so the front area would be accessible to the public who were walking and use, but the connections between the homes would be private.
Right, on the backside.
Right.
On the opposite side.
And then in the master plan of the senior cottages, obviously, and the multi-story, that's, we kind of pride ourselves on how much green space that we allow and a park-like setting and beautiful aesthetics, landscaping and waterfalls and all of the lovelies.
So would your outdoor activity area on the other side, you've got pickleball courts and shuffleboard and all that, would that, is that would that just be to your senior living residents? Because that's what I'm just trying to figure out as we looking at park space and, with meeting our UGA requirements and all of that. I think that's part of why we had that requirement in there. In the smaller park setting, I'm not sure kind of some of that.
Yeah, we envision having some of that outdoor activity area open to the other residential homes. Again, we love that engagement of just your, residential homes with our senior community, our senior populace. So we find it important. That's kind of why we also envisioned and have kind of the wave now is incorporating in that first story of the multi-story facilities, that public coffee shop, that, the clinic, the doctor's office. We want to engage our residents with the community. And so it's been very popular and well received in other communities, campuses like this.
And so is there anywhere else in Spokane that is doing something like this?
There's a facility on the South Hill called Touchmark that has the multi-story senior living. They also, on their campus, have a skill care, they have assisted living, they have memory care, and they have the individual senior cottages just like this. Very,
But they're like, so my mother-in-law was there,
Uh-huh.
so their coffee shop though wasn't really open to the
And-
public as much as
exactly. And
everything was
right.
contained and took for residents only.
Right, but the new concept of these across the nation is to incorporate more of that open public space. Because what you find in a Touchmark type product is our seniors want to engage with just each other every day. They don't particularly care for that. They want to engage in public. And so this is something that is going across the nation on all new projects. They're incorporating this type of environment, campus, feel, public access, and it's working really well. They have a facility down across the street from ASU, down in Phoenix, that they've done just that. They've used that first story to engage and have even college students coming over and using the bistro and using the public coffee shop. And they actually placed it just so that their seniors could go across the street and be engaged in classes, adult classes at ASU, and it has worked out fabulously. So it's kind of a wave of the future, is just not putting our seniors in a corner, it's engaging them in the community as best we can.
So just to confirm, so the terrace homes and the townhomes will be owner occupied. That correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then everything, your senior living cottages, your independent living, those will be some sort of lease type option for the individuals that are there, similar to other sort of assisted living facilities. But-
Yes.
Okay, okay. Okay, so I know you said you're not quite to the 20% of retail. What is the percentage, would you estimate approximately?
Well, I think we would be at the 20% if the multi-story buildings with the retail uses on the main floor count and the assisted living and then the storage units in the very northeast corner of town, we would be at that 70% threshold.
Okay,
Yeah, so it's,
But not retail sales tax.
gotcha, yeah.
20%, that would be retail sales tax providing.
Yeah.
So.
But they're great Amazon users.
And some of the other positives are having these in. I know people are often worried about what's traffic. Well, these types of communities typically bring in less traffic. I know some people will talk about, oh, the school district is really pressed for having capacity. Well, there's not going to be students going. So there are some positives that complement it as well.
And what I was hoping, that we've been bouncing this around now for a number of years, ever since we bought it. What I was hoping for is not to have another development where the residential is built out and the commercial just sits there because nobody can come up with a real viable commercial use. And commercial uses, I mentioned Amazon, you talk about changing commercial uses before our eyes and the restaurant business and stuff. So it's hard. So I was hoping our team came up with an idea where we're bringing up the whole property at once. So we'd probably lead with the assisted living and everything, so the property gets fully developed and becomes that community much quicker than having what I call islands of commercial property where people are hoping somebody comes along and all of a sudden a fast food restaurant goes on a corner that may not fit exactly what you wanted there. And we are off the main drag, and we do have the competition of the new Greenstone development, which is, I think, is awesome. Because then that gave us an opportunity to come up with something that we feel is really complementary to our population. And so.
So how far away is the Greenstone development? It's a little ways, it's not next door.
Maybe 2 miles or so.
Yeah, this is 395 and the other one's Highway 2.
Yeah.
So,
There is a lot of retail right there already.
yeah.
Yes, no, no, on 395 right there in Farwell, there's a lot of retail. Already, but
One different shop, so.
yeah, but I mean, I think the vision when we were, looking at this was again, just trying to have that, places that we could have new families, being able to get homes and help people, get those first time homes. And have retail, that's walkable, similar to Kendall Yards, and I think back, I pulled up the proposal, Gina pulled up for me. In Boise, you used Boise as an example of one of the areas that they had to try to make it,
Village.
more community. So this is just, a different way of looking at it, and thinking about it. And I think we would have to, I don't know, Mr. Micho, the process that we'd have to go through to change, doesn't happen overnight.
Madam Chair, and I think, thank you for putting out the document on the screen, because I think paragraph 6 of the document that we sold the property to them suggests that if we're gonna modify any provisions, we need to do some sort of formal process. And so I think the first question that I heard them say is, what particular language in the document do we need to change? And so the first question is, do you need the 20% commercial? And I don't know the answer to that. I've heard what you said, but that would be something we want to touch base with our planning director on. If they don't meet that, then we would have to change that number. The second thing is, I understand that you want to change the phasing so that you don't need to do it with each phase at that number. So we need to look at that. And then the final thing, just to remind the board, I wasn't here when you signed this document, but my understanding is the consideration that was paid for the property was based to some degree on what the document presently says. So I think we want to at least review the consideration, whether or not any change to the conditions have any bearing upon the consideration, because I think we did that originally. I don't know that it would, but that's something we'd want to at least look at, so we felt comfortable. So, Madam Chair, if any changes would need to be formally acted on by the board, and that would simply take some sort of modification of the conveyance document, consistent with what the board wanted to do. And so if I hear the board suggest they're interested in potentially making changes to the conveyance document based on what we've seen, then we can determine what changes, if any, we need to make in that document, bring it back to the board for formal action. Does that make sense? I think that's where we want to be. Yep.
Commissioner French.
So, Jim, from a sequencing standpoint, and I'm just throwing this out here for you to comment on. It would seem to me that they know more about this project than we do in terms of the numbers, the percentages and all that kind of stuff. Would it be appropriate for them to come back and say, these are the changes that need to be made to accommodate this project? And then at least then we've got a starting point that says, okay, that's at least now we've got a line in the sand that says, now we've got something to talk about. Otherwise, we could sit here and guess about 20%, 18%, whatever that number is, but we don't have the data to be able to do that. They do. Is that a reasonable approach?
Commissioner French, that's a very good approach. As I said before, I'm a writing person. I like to see something in writing. Here's what we propose. Here's potential changes to the conveyance document for your consideration. Here's the information in this particular document that supports our change. And so therefore, then we can timely process that, Commissioner French. I think that's what you're suggesting.
I mean, it would ultimately, doesn't it come down to essentially what would be a developer agreement? Other than, the only difference is we don't have a developer agreement, we've got a deed.
Exactly
That we're
right.
modifying the deed, but the end goal is very similar in terms of process.
That is correct, Commissioner French.
Yeah, I guess that would, that would be what I would be wanting to see too, kind of what do you really think would be what retail sales tax? Like, or what that percentage is versus, understanding, you can say what commercial is, that senior living fits within commercial, what that percentage is. And then, really getting, more detail on the number of housing and all of that, what's really senior housing versus what's, other potential housing, and kind of what was curious as you talk about phasing, what your phasing strategy is, so we know. That's. Look at that, again, this is a unique piece of property since it was county property that we were trying to have developed in a manner that was gonna be providing, you know, that housing and that retail revenue. So it's just, you know, trying to get the numbers to know it, with it changing, what does that really look like? And we need to make that change. Scott.
Question on the individual units, townhomes and the terrace homes. You envision those to be individual lots, in ownership of lots as well?
Yes.
Okay, so then I don't know if these are trails, I don't wanna infer, I don't know if these are trails that are going through here, is that envisioned to be individuals' yards in the back there and their own green space back there, not like a community green space?
So that would be community green space between those units, so that the units would come with very small yards and that there would be community space with trails to traverse the property and you know, walk, loops, or however you wanted to get down to the amenities. And again, the site has a lot of topography, and the majority of that topography is from that perimeter road at the back of those units to the back of the lower units, so this the largest slope. So this trail would actually be on a hillside, but allow you to go from the bottom up to the top, back through the green space, so you can.
So you develop it like an HOA to
Mhm.
have.
Yep,
What I envision is that each one of those residential units would be a site, a plat. And that everything accesses to common area that by an HOA or some kind of similar structure. I mean, for either condo development or townhouse development and stuff, that kind of structure. Probably more so in Idaho than it is in Washington, but it's still a very common structure. In fact, got a number of them even inside the city as we can.
Yeah, makes sense. Which adds to the green space then
Mhm.
for the development.
Yeah, you know, what makes this for forward planning is just critical, is to get the grading right. When you start moving 600,000 yards of dirt, you don't want to have to move it twice, nor do we want disruption in that community more than once. We want to be able to have it all figured out and you know, do it at one time. It's a huge undertaking that has continued since the property has been purchased to escalate in cost. You know, so we got to get it right the first time.
So in terms of procedure, I understand the information that you would like us to collect and present. When would be the next meeting that we could do that for?
It would just be when you're ready to come back, then we'd schedule with the
Okay.
board.
Yeah.
To do that.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's now back in your court, so,
Okay.
you know, develop the language according to Mr. Nacio or Mr. Anderson. And, then they're happy to come on back.
And then.
I would recommend that you send that correspondence to the Board of County Commissioners, and then they'll share it with legal counsel, and then we can look it over and get back with you to be sure everyone's on the same page.
Yes.
I think that's what Commissioner French and the board had in mind, right, Commissioner Cuny?
Yes, and then we'd schedule it probably again for a Monday briefing, which we have our Monday, every other Monday.
Okay. Wonderful.
So every other Monday is good.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
it's fall for
Mm-hmm.
something not thinking I. Yeah, that's the big thing.
Yeah,
all right. Oh, yeah, we're putting in
My guess is-
multiple communities overnight.
Yeah. Planning
If
next
if
to
you get
that.
your vote, they'll put a Mariner logo on it.
Oh. I can talk.
I'm just saying.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much. Thank you.
They don't want things where it's Curtis. Right.
Yeah, well, we could do Mariner on one side and Chicago Cubs on
Oh,
the
yeah,
other.
there we go. That's double curse.
Yeah.
Don't want to do.
Now you're getting really dark.
Good morning. How are you doing? I'm doing well. Good. How about all of you? Good. I think we're already behind schedule, so we're just gonna have to get going.
Okay. Well, I think everybody knows me here, but Tori Peterson, Juvenile Court Director.
And I'm here just to give you some information on our detention rate.
Thank you. All right.
Ron, this slide, this might be a little bit long, and since we're behind, I might ask you to skip a couple slides. But we're gonna start with this one, which, oh, I'm sorry, back one more. This one, probably the most important, are the statutes that require the use of juvenile detention. And you'll see the first one requires counties containing more than 50,000 of population to maintain a detention center at public expense. And throughout this chapter, we cannot house kids with adults, so you'll see that often. The second one again requires the construction, acquisition, and maintenance as a mandatory function for several counties in the state. And of course, those are the counties that are over population of 50,000. And then finally, the third one requires the boards of county commissioners to appropriate sufficient funds that meet the demands and adequate care for children. And also for the payment of salaries for adequate staff of juvenile officers and then clerical assistants. Then of course for food, clothing, and recreational facilities. So sums that up, we are not an option. We're required to exist. The next slide. I think it's important you see juvenile court funding on a whole, because we do get a fair amount of state funding. It's 21%. The county funding is over on the right. And the total of county funds we get, and this is 2023 numbers, 6.8 million. If you see down below in the red there, detention and electronic monitoring account for 3.9 million. And electronic monitoring by statute, again, is a detention facility. Electronic monitoring is in that definition. So 3.9 million, and that includes a little bit of me, a little bit of our business manager and our business office, because they also support the detention center. All right, go ahead, Ron. This is just some data. This slide is juvenile court as a whole, referrals that we get. And this is just from 22 to 23, the increase in referrals that we've had, an increase in our intakes into detention themselves. There's been a fairly significant increase in serious felonies coming in, a lot of weapons charges. So it just speaks to the public safety issues.
When you talk about referrals, are you talking about from the courts,
From law enforcement.
from law enforcement? Okay, thank you.
So bookings.
No, this is referrals to law enforcement. Not all kids come to us through detention. Law enforcement can have contact with a kid and then just what we call a paper referral comes into our social files and then to the prosecutor's office. So not all of these referrals come through detention. They do come through the court, but not straight to detention. Okay, next slide talks to the detention specific data. Now, these are law enforcement referrals to us. So these are the kids, the numbers that were brought to detention. And again, you'll see the significant increase from 22 to 23.
And these are included in the numbers you gave us.
Yes, yes. This is just a subset of those. Okay, exactly.
So help me understand. So are you saying that if law enforcement arrests the kid and before he's adjudicated, if law enforcement officer brings it to your facility, that's what these are?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I was understanding it right.
correct.
Okay.
So you'll see the increase of 72%, that's 610. But we're still a little bit lower than we were pre-COVID. We've just seen a significant increase in the seriousness of the offenses. Okay, next slide. This is the one I think I'll skip through. I'll just let you know that all the kids that come to us are assessed based on risk and needs all the way, right when they come in our door to all through their time with us. And it's for case management and to address those needs and risks. Our average daily population for 2023 is 25.
This number allows us to get to the rehabilitative work, the work that we can do to work with the kids. Hopefully extend them out with some skills. I will say in the nineties, I know it was a long time ago, in the nineties, that number was about 80. And then it's just slowly decreased over the years. Largely started in 2000s when we started a lot of juvenile system reform and looking at who should be in detention and who doesn't.
Just a question on that, is that more of a reflection of a changing length of stay? Or is it more, less, instances actually leading to detention?
It can be, but we also have a screening tool of who stays in detention, so we have some that get booked and released. And that was based on a reform, it's a validated tool where it's objective tool on who comes in and who goes out, which you can always override based on safety factors or needs.
Do you see more electronic monitoring or kind of the engagement outside of the actual building then as a result of that?
Yes, well, we were the first county in the state to have electronic monitoring. We've had that since the nineties. And so kids that we think can be safely monitored in the community where they can stay connected to their community and their school, there's an assessment that they get to determine. And then if that's not working out, we can bring them straight back to detention, back and forth. Like I said, EM is considered detention.
Just one more follow-up, if they are going through the court process, but they're not in detention. Maybe there's some kind of stipulations release. Whose job is it to kind of monitor that and stay in touch with the client and make sure that they're complying with that?
We do not do supervised release. Okay. There's a lot of issues with that. And some around the law, so we rely on when they're released, they're given some release conditions. But then we rely on parents and schools. And if something comes to our detention, then they can go back and the judge. That's how.
And these numbers are exclusive of anybody you send to Martin Hall.
No, Martin Hall, with our contract with Martin Hall, law enforcement does not take a Spokane County kid directly to Martin Hall. We would use Martin Hall as a population control tool.
Right.
Which we have only used, I think it was almost a year ago that I used it for probably a month or 2 month period, and before that, I think it's been 15 years.
Okay, all right,
So
thank
that
you.
it's rarely used.
Yeah.
We don't have any kids there.
So there's good reason.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But don't you also use Martin Hall if there's like certain gang issues?
If there is, if we don't think that we can manage that, but we have managed that well. Sometimes maybe codependents, but again, when I used it last year, it was because our population was over the top. We were having some building maintenance issues and some of our kids and our low staffing, it was just too much to handle. So we had to send some kids out there. So the building itself provides for short-term community safety, obviously. But it is the work of our corrections staff that really gets long-term community safety by the work they do to change criminal thinking and to skill build. We want to send the kids out better than they came in, and some different thinking and some different skills. That's where you get long-term community safety. And our hope is they're not going to continue through the system into the adult side, which is an obvious cost savings. But they provide most of the programming for our kids. And you'll see down on the bottom left, we make a strong effort to stay connected to the community. We are part of the community and we want the community involved with us. So we have several community providers that come in and also work with the kids. These listed here are no cost. It's part of their outreach. And again, a lot of skill building. This is our library down on the bottom right. Top left is our cafeteria. We do get our food from the jail. It's a lower cost. And we had a nutritionist look at it. It's not enough protein, so just a little added fat. We'd have to supplement for adolescent brain more protein. Go ahead, Ron. Thank you. A lot of our kids have a lot of trauma, and so they are artistic and like to deal with that through art. And so we have, ESD provides our school in our detention center, and they have hired somebody who does art. And then we also brought in somebody with lived experience that does this all over the West Coast to work with kids. And that's where we had two opposing gangs actually working together on a project with no issues. It was the skill that this gentleman brought in. And then there's the sport court. Obviously, we have to provide recreation. We also give kids the opportunity to get a food handler's card, CPR certification, and first aid. And again, that's about sending them back into the community. It's not going to make in a positive way. Go ahead, Rowan. So we were the first licensed behavioral health agency to become a licensed behavioral health agency in the state. We just completed our third FRIA audit, that's Prison Rate Elimination Act. And again, we were the first in the state to do that. We have 37 full-time staff that cover 4 shifts. 20 of those are corrections officers, 5 shift supervisors, and then we have 2 support staff in detention, 2 managers. Those probation counselors are in electronic monitoring, and then 1 support staff there. We have 2 full-time nurses and a mental health physician, and I say physician because we've been unable to fill that for almost a year. And the staff from the jail, mental health staff from the jail, have been amazing in coming over and helping us support getting the kids' needs met. We also have a doctor of nursing, and she also is a psych and mental health nurse. So she was with us probably 5 hours a week. I will say in detention, it's our largest recruitment and retention issues. JCO start at $23 an hour. And you can find that a lot of other places where you're not working 12-hour graveyard shift, getting assaulted or spit on. So it's been hard to, and that's, we all know that's everywhere. There's recruitment retention issues. I did ask if they put in a request for a sign-on bonus, and that was denied. So hopefully sometime we'll get. Again, it talks about the programming led by our corrections officers and the training they get to do that. They're not just moving and monitoring. They are working with the kids, and we provide them that training. We have a level system which aids in behavior management, and like a lot of the things we do, like the trauma-informed care, the motivational interviewing, and just behavior management in general is research informed. And research says that you need to give 5 to 1. I actually think they've increased that ratio. 5 incentives, 5 positives to 1 sanction. So it's a catch them doing something right. A lot of these kids have not received any sort of positive feedback on anything. So we've done extensive work on that level system and incentives. Again, those are our staff, some of them on the right. We have made it a priority to hire staff that look like the kids. I think that's important, dealing with kids. So we have a diverse employee population. Okay, next slide. We are required by law to provide kids education, and New ESD 101 has done that with us for years. They're in our detention center as well as in our alternative school that is in the basement of the HR building. Kids can get, while they're in detention, GED prep and GED testing. When they get their GED, when they're in detention, we try to make it celebratory, by parents, get a little graduation. As you can see by this young man's smile, this young man, I do not believe would have received his GED had he not been in our facility. And then they can get credit retrieval. And then of course we try to connect them back if they were engaged in a community school or upon release to get them engaged. Next slide, and that is it. Have any questions?
So when we talk about how many the average age of the population, so it was 20. And then how many are going through? You know, just all the things you guys are doing. And saying that the population's come down, you know, over time. That's because of looking at different alternatives and things that you're doing. And it, just ever since I've been a commissioner, it seems like Spokane County's kind of always been on the forefront of trying to do that. But really trying hard to help these individuals, these kids, you know, to be successful. And so thank you for that.
Yes.
And I guess, you know, if you're 37 now, how many unfilled, or 20 corrections officers, how many unfilled positions do you have right now?
Those are, well, we just lost a great candidate. She came back and said, because of this pay, I think we're down 4 right now. So 20 is what we're funding. So our overtime budget is going to keep going because it is burning out the staff. And that's 4 shifts. We're running lean. We're barely meeting the FREDA standards for our population is low. So now the population is low, but the in and out, our average length of stay is pretty low unless we have those kids that are being charged as adult that are under 18. So they tend to stay a lot longer. So kids coming in and out, the work just of that is significant.
What, and is the state law now changing that it's no longer just 18, it's now 18 to 25? How is?
I'm not sure
What's that?
when we'll get there, but that was first introduced by Senator Darnell, who then is left and running an adult women's prison. But there are some that are picking up that torch and running it a bit. Some of my counterparts across the state, JCIs, are on a committee required by the legislature to give a report on what that would entail. What I'm hearing from them is this will happen. It's what the others on this committee are doing. So they want to raise it to 21 and then to 25. And that's based on adolescent brain development. There's good research behind it. The complexity of doing that, it's extensive.
Yeah, I guess I was hoping you'd talk a little bit, I mean, because that's kind of what can be coming down the pike here soon. With legislation that will put more burden on counties to be able to do this, because now you've got.
Well, currently, they raise the age of jurisdiction. We will not have the issue of housing an adult. We have to have sight sound separate. Juveniles from adults have to be sight sound separate. They raise that age of jurisdiction, and they would all be under juvenile jurisdiction, and I'm sure they would change those other statutes. But there is a difference between, let's say we get to 25, significant to get difference in a 24, 25-year-old, then we can get some 14-year-olds that are difficult. So housing them together and the management of that, the size of our facility would not handle that. The current where we are in just maintenance of that building would not handle that. And then you have the jail, kids from the jail coming here, prosecutors, public defenders, that's such a shift. And judges.
Okay, thank you. I think it's just important for us to know that that's what's happening. To be aware of.
Yeah.
Because I didn't realize it until I was over at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
So is there marked difference between the youth that you're seeing today and let's say the youth that you would see through the facility pre-COVID? I mean, is there demonstrative change in their personality, their perceptions, their actions, their interactions that have changed the way that you have to deal with them in your custody?
That's a great question.
Thank
The
you.
acuity of the kids that we're seeing, I've been in juvenile court for 33 years, in juvenile justice and working with at-risk kids for 35 years. And I've never seen what we're seeing now. Be just aggressive and angry and very little really difficult to get them to respond to anything on search. Some's fine, but we've had to call the jail over when we get a 6'5", 200-pound kid, and we have on adult charges. And he comes in and 3 of my staff are then injured and out. We don't do tasers. We don't do any of that. And so we've had to call the jail over a couple times. These kids really doing serious damage. Yeah, it's different. They are different. We see it all over everybody. Everybody seems to be a little more angry, and the kids who just, and these are the kids that already come from trauma. The vast majority of the time, they already come from places where they get little social help support and family support. So then you throw COVID on that, and that just compounds a lot of triggering. It's like they just don't care. And so, yeah, we have to manage some things differently. And then on top of that, in 2021, legislation was passed that we can't just put kids in their room for, say, punishment. There's something going on where if we have to separate them, you have to go back to your room for a while. That anything over 15 minutes, then my staff have to go and put eyes on that kid every 15 minutes and document. Then at the first opportunity when their behavior is de-escalated, we have to let them out. And so if we have to take them back to intake, away from the general population because of behavior or riling of everybody else, that's a whole different thing. That's considered isolation. So then you need a mental health provider to go check on the kid. So the amount of time that it takes staff just to track that. Significant. Anything over 24 hours, a call comes to me, no matter when it is. So the legislators in Washington are quite a bit juvenile justice, and there'll be a lot more in this next session.
So my understanding is that that same condition exists down in Boise. And kids are much more aggressive now than they ever were before. And the amount of energy it takes to manage the same size population is much more intensive now than it ever has been in the past. And so I'm just curious as to whether it's something that we're seeing as well. And you validated that we're having the same challenges.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
And younger kids, we're getting more females and younger kids who are so serious.
So, I mean, I think that the main reason for this presentation is that we have the renewal on this November. So if that fails, which, I mean, I'm still confident it will pass, but if it does not, what programming do you have that is discretionary that, you know, unfortunately, we would have to consider possibly doing away with?
We run lean, not have a lot of discretionary. I am not required by law to have a mental health professional in my building, nor am I required by law to have the nursing on site. I'm required to provide medical. It would be a lot more costly if I had to go out for that. We'd be sending a lot more kids to the ER. And when they're with us and we go to ER, that's our bill. That's the county's bill. Programming, that's why we have a lot of our staff do it and train them to do that. The other folks that come in, it's part of their community outreach. So I do not have a lot that's not required in those first 3 RCWs that I showed. So I would have to mental health or nursing, and those are critical. That's not where, given the choice, I just wouldn't make those cuts. So it would have to, I'd probably have to look at my other county folks that work in the community. Or those are the tough choices you know.
Cory, can you share how, back on that funding slide, I guess very helpful. Where does juvenile court functions, funding, the judge, the judicial system, all those, where do those fit into this, or are they more in the Superior Court Department funds?
Judges, except for if you see down here, if you're gonna look at that slide, the BECA bill, the money that comes from BECA and that comes from the state funds part of a judge. And that's just for those cases under BECA. Otherwise, that all falls under Superior Court. None of my budget here goes to judges. Was there more to that question, yes?
No, I was just
Okay.
wanting to help the public understand and for discussion here, just knowing that the court itself is funded separately from it.
Just to follow up on that slide, it says, I'm just trying to get a sense of the dollars and where they go. It says 6.8 million from the county, and then there's a detention and monitoring highlighted. Can you just explain kind of the difference between those two?
Well, I highlighted that because that's what we were talking about is detention and electronic monitoring. So 3.9 of that 6.8 runs our detention center and our electronic monitoring.
And so the administration and diversion, et cetera, would account for the other
The remaining
funds.
of the 6.8. And actually, I'll say administration, I use that broadly here, that of course accounts for me. If you look over here, where it's what's funded by the state, that's all the probation counselors doing that work of probation or monitoring and programming. However, the supervisors that we have over those programs are paid for out of the 6.8. And they're the supervisors that carry half a caseload or not much of a caseload, and the assignment cases take more complicated cases, quality assurance.
And just to follow up on Commissioner Kern's question, with the renewal on the ballot, I have heard a similar question from community members of if it doesn't pass, what's the consequence of that? So I don't know if we think it might be worthwhile to have a more in-depth kind of budget-oriented conversation on that, just to really get a sense of what choices are we facing in that event. I think that's important to educate people to understand that.
$16 million that goes away from our budget.
Yeah, that funds, those dollars fund my entire detention center and
Yes.
electronic.
And reducing the budget is not an option for juvenile because it's required by the state for us to provide it. So cuts would have to come from other places.
Okay, anything else for Tori? All right, thank you for coming and presenting. No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Good to see you all.
Good to see you too. Thank you for all the work that you do. Okay, I'm gonna see if we can. Let the others go a little quicker because I know we've got. I think the F is some attorneys. I gotta check if they're on Zoom or in virtual. Yeah. That's what I think he just said this morning, so. So just wanna be,
What's that for which items?
okay. Yeah.
Social media.
Good morning.
Good morning, Scott. So Scott, just to let you know, so we are running.
Yes.
So we're gonna see if we can. Have this go a little quicker, if that's okay.
Thank you for your presentation.
Not quite, but close.
Yes,
No.
happy to do that. And that's fine. Obviously, three of you will see this again on Wednesday. We're here to preview that before you take it to the steering committee. But we're doing that because it gives us a chance to get your comments ahead of going to the steering committee. And that'll inform our presentation at that time. What we're here to talk about are kind of two things. One is the countywide planning policies that relate to housing. You'll recall when we updated the planning policies in 2022, we left this one on the shelf because of anticipated legislative action later that year, which did take place. We're now reacting to those mandates from the legislature and putting this piece together. You can see one of the first slides we're talking about is what are these new requirements? New programs identify racially disparate impacts and provide options within urban areas to do that. Next slide, please. Most of these are in these kind of 9 new categories, so there's quite a lot of detail. Those of us that remember the old countywide planning policies for housing, essentially they said, provide for affordable housing. It was left almost kind of that vague. Now with the legislation, we're looking at much more details, including you can see these criteria that are before you. And the new policies terms of guiding housing allocations and their methodology is also a change because we're looking at having to provide or requiring our communities to allow for housing based on income bands that are related to area median income, and they are starting at 0 to 30% area median income. And then a group that simply goes forward in those various bands. Next slide, please. So these are some of the major changes that have been put in addition to those policies you saw in the previous slide. The environmental sustainability category we're saying is removed here. It's really shifted. We're moving that into its own category to be able to have actually a stronger statement about that rather than leaving it in the housing category itself. The shelters and permanent supportive housing are requirements from the legislature. And so those have been added as detailed policies. And again, the actual policy language itself was in your folders, both in a clean and a red line version. See. Next slide, please. Where this has been considered is certainly through the PTAC, both as a whole, as well as a population and housing subcommittee. Generally, the county and the two major cities were participating in that subcommittee. The steering committee itself and its public policy subcommittee that was created. We have had some conversations from the public and stakeholders directly related to this. And it's a kind of a big emphasis for the 2026 update. We've had a number of organizations and individuals wanting to participate in the upcoming technical advisory committee for housing that will take guidance from these policies. Next slide, please. And the schedule that you can see of where this has gone from May to August, what we call version 2.2 is the current version. In your packets, we shared it with the Planning Commission last week to also get some feedback from that. And then it will go to the steering committee on Wednesday for their feedback. Next slide, please. And then the schedule, and this is a little bit off as our meeting kind of bounced from today's agenda to tomorrow's agenda and back to today's agenda. We've got kind of one wrong date up there. We're here with today instead of the 20th. The Planning Commission had that on Thursday. We are anticipating the steering committee being able to provide solid direction at their September meeting, which is a month from this Wednesday's meeting. And then that would come back to you for adoption in October. We would come back with the usual series of briefings and then asking for your action in October. That is the guts of the planning policies. If you would like to talk about the allocations, we've got Bongo and Tate from our planning staff who have been doing the detailed work on how those allocations lay out and what they look like. As we talked with you briefly before, it's a tool from Commerce, a methodology that Commerce has provided to all of our immigrants in the state. And there was a method A, a method B, and a method C, and the method C was anything else that you can defend. Subsequently, they have created what we call an A prime or an adjusted version of A, which is the methodology that the steering committee and the PTAC has generally accepted moving forward. What A prime does is it simply, or in the simplest sense, it moves the 0 to 50% of area median income categories out of rural settings. So the county would not be responsible for those two categories in our unincorporated urban growth areas. What that does is it unincorporated rural areas. It pushes that number back into the cities and the rest of the UGA. And those allocations are starting to be discussed. They will be, and it's a reminder that this is not a mandate from the state to actually build housing for those income levels. It's a mandate to say your regulations must allow for it. So that's the distinction that all of us in the PTAC and the steering committee will be working on Wednesday. Happy to take any questions you may have.
So when you create that language that says it allows for, can our language allow for greater quantities of a certain housing type than the state permits?
Greater quantities, I would
So
say,
I'm
yeah.
gonna speak specifically to, right now, the state legislature has deemed that 12 units of condos is all you can have in a single structure.
Oh.
Where, any reasonable person would say, if I can build 300 apartments, I can build 300 condos. There is no difference other than the designation of what it is. But it does go a long way to provide access to home ownership through condo development and stuff. And so that's what I was trying to get to, is can we provide greater flexibility for housing opportunities and home ownership than the state allows?
This part of the legislative action has no impact on the rental market versus condo market. That still has to be another piece of legislation that you fighting it from the building code perspective. Others have been trying to do that. This does not impact that ownership model at this point.
Okay. Let me ask the question a little bit differently then. In low density residential, we typically have one home per lot. With the recent legislation that says now you can have 4 rental properties per lot. Could you also then have 4 homes for home ownership per lot?
I don't know of anything in the county code that prohibits that. I think you
Okay.
can.
All right.
And
That's a great answer.
those are the things that we will definitely be looking at in the 26 update. And that's the idea of having a range of residential uses allowed by right in a zone instead of having that zone be so exclusive that you can only get limits.
Okay.
So we'll be bringing that discussion back to you pretty quickly.
Thank you.
Wednesday's meeting is Zoom only, correct?
That's correct.
Thanks for this is kind of like a draft that is kind of working draft that you'll take back to steering committee and back to us.
Yes.
Correct, okay.
The steering committee will make recommendations to the county board.
Okay. And it was drafted in coordination.
Yes.
Okay. I just kind of looking through it for the first time, it seems there's a mixture of shalls and shoulds, right, for
Yes.
jurisdiction. So can you just talk about why that's the case?
Sure.
I assume that a great deal of it is just kind of passing along what's required under state law. But to what extent is this just applying with state law versus making choices?
That is kind of precisely the discussion that has taken place with VTAC, and I'll let our guys talk about that. They've been in the trenches.
I'll take a stab at it and then take it out on. In regards to the shalls, we only have mandatory language where it is required by state law. And there were a couple of cases where we just reiterated state law without adding anything to it. We cut those out because there was really no reason to include them. So the shalls we have remaining there, first off, they're in state law. You have to do this, everyone has to do it. It's not required by the county, or it's in existing CPPs. And then we're suggesting here 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, things you might do to meet this, that's kind of the case with the shall, the should, exactly what it sounds like. Those are just recommendations from the county to the jurisdictions that they can take or not take as they like, but take out anything else about it.
I don't think so. Should and shall are also defined in the CPP glossary, so it's very this is mandatory, this is discretionary. So I just add that it is defined in our CPPs as well.
There was quite a lot of discussion at VTAC about all this.
What was the flavor of that discussion? Was there different opinions on whether things should be required?
My assessment is that VTAC wanted very much to move toward a more permissive set of guidelines rather than a hard set of policies. There was some discussion of even the municipalities may do things rather than should do. We kind of drew the line at that point, saying what's.
So how would you characterize this product in relation to that discussion?
I think this is a pretty good first step from a somewhat confusing piece of legislation. I don't believe the legislature had a firm idea of what the impact of this was in breaking down these income levels. And essentially making the county allocate these to the constituents, cities and towns. I suspect this will be an ongoing process that the PTAC and the steering committee will discover, which will probably inform us as a legislative agenda that you may choose to take forward in January as well. I think this is the first step of an iterative. But it's one where we have reached at least a consensus among the cities and towns to at this level to take it forward. So we're very much interested to see how the steering committee itself will look at this for kind of the first time in total.
The steering committee has reviewed it once.
That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you, commissioners, and we'll see some of you on Wednesday, and this will be back before you later on.
And we have two meetings on Wednesday. We got 7:30 for the subcommittee.
Oh,
And then the regular meeting later on the day. We're still doing both.
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Richard. Oh. Welcome.
Morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. By the way, those 12 attachments will probably just go in order, just to make it easy. You have the right one open up though. Anything you'd like to say, sir?
Nope, Paul's got it. Okay, I guess this is just follow up to the briefing that we had a few weeks back on community framework, some of the loans that we have in our portfolio. So Paul's been crunching numbers and trying to come up with a variety of different ways of kind of demonstrating what the portfolio looks like. And so this is a follow up to that.
So this PowerPoint presentation right here is essentially kind of a big overview of what the affordable housing program really is. The big purpose of it is increasing the supply of affordable housing, preservation, and allowing homeownership opportunities, affordable rental opportunities, different innovative solutions for getting people affordable housing. And we also, with the program, have to ensure state and federal compliance of all kinds of different things like monitoring for different percentages, making sure that our local funding is matching the federal funding, different things like that. Next slide. These are our three funding sources, just so you're aware of them. The home is federal, sales and use tax and document recording fees are local. And we've been doing the price application. We've been trying to get into other funding sources as well. And this is, I have the home sales and use tax and document recording fees here listed out. If you want to look at it in detail, just for the sake of time, I don't want to get too deep into it. But essentially, home is the most restrictive and the biggest pain as far as all the funding sources go. So essentially, this is the one that we kind of want just pass through funding, get it out, get developers using it. It's also the one that we kind of have timelines on as well, so we have to make sure that it's being used within a timely manner.
So on that, so do you have approximately each year, how much each of those is?
Yes, ma'am. So we've got $1 million approximately annually for home.
Excellent.
I think we've got sales and use tax, I think that one was about $1 million, and then document recording fees about 500,000.
Thank you.
Then you could next, I think 3 times. So essentially, what do we do? HCD, we're investing in affordable housing. And that term investing is quite flexible because there's no such thing as actual investment in affordable housing unless it's something like low income housing tax credits. Everything else is essentially subsidizing. So the big reason why we wanted to come to you and give you a little bit of an overview is just to kind of understand that there's no real monetary return aside from a low income housing tax credit deal. So we have a couple different methods of investing. We could give out loans, we can give out grants, but also on the more innovative side, we could do things like land dedications per RCW, or we can waive fees, like we can waive, property taxes, things like that. So there are other ways that we could, possibly not use our funding to promote affordable housing. So we do that via contracts, and we do that via recorded covenants as well to ensure that these properties stay affordable. Next slide, please. So our old practice, this is kind of the big reason why we would want to come to you is we want to make sure that we're standardizing our procedures, making sure that we have standard practice and make sure it's sustainable. So before us, how it was done, it was maximizing returns and more of maximizing monetary returns. It was also maximizing restrictions and maximizing the quantity of restrictions. And the problem with this method is that whenever you maximize every single thing, you essentially aren't making a very fair deal. So you can't just maximize a return and also maximize a restriction. It doesn't make sense. It's me asking for more money, but also telling you that you have to pay me more money back for me asking for that money, or me asking for more rental units to restrict and me telling you to pay me back more in a loan. So it's an unfair deal, essentially how it's previously done. It's also a bit inconsistent. So a lot of the different things in the portfolio, we've got, I believe around, around 50 properties, and just doing some bare calculations of all those properties, it doesn't seem like they're very consistent. Some are extremely restricted, some are not very restricted. So in some portions, as I'll try to show you later on, some of these deals have essentially caused the county to have excessive returns, while others have actually not been very fair returns to the county. So they're kind of very far in front or very far behind in terms of having a fair deal. So what we want to do is just, like I said, make sure we actually use some kind of calculation, make sure we're doing fair deals, actually putting in actually running numbers and making sure we're doing something consistently and not just having people come in and, negotiate loan terms, or us just throw out a number and then all of a sudden we agree or disagree. It shouldn't really work like that, especially when we're talking about possible loans and grants. So next slide, please. That's the long-term strategy for us. We want to standardize. We want to minimize the variance between investments. We want to possibly look into innovative solutions. So one of those was something like land dedications. Obviously, we would need to have potentially other funding sources to do something like that. But if we're able to create new funding sources, that would be a possibility. We also want to grow affordable housing, obviously, but we also want to support existing affordable housing. But to ensure all of this, we have to make sure the program is actually sustainable. Because if we just start throwing money left and right, it'll be difficult to sustain the whole thing. So, next slide, please.
Question for you.
Yes, sir.
So when I was with the city, we looked at the possibility of taking the CDBG funds and creating a land bank. And then, we retain ownership of the land and then ground lease to developers to build housing. But we always retain access to the land. Do we have the ability to do something like that here at the county? With either CDBG or home or some resource that will come in to be able to at least jumpstart a detriment in bank?
I think 100%. I think it's been done previously. One project comes to mind, Pine Villa, that was done using CDBG for the acquisition and then home to develop. But George might have a better idea.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with land banking is the feds, they get a little testy about things sitting for too long. So we did a project when I was at the city up Lower South Hill, and we bought property with the intent of it being developed into affordable housing. And then we just wrote into the contractual terms that if we don't meet these different benchmarks by these periods of time, then the property could be returned to the city because the investment goal was not met. So there are ways to do it. It gets kind of tricky with that. But as long as we have a planned strategy that we can convey accurately to HUD, then they're willing to support because they know that it just takes time to do those developments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's what I like about this portfolio is that there's so many ways that we can go about it. It's just important for us to create standard so that we're not jumping around, because then, 10 years from now, somebody could be doing something completely different from us. And if we create a strategy or a standard now, we could at least make sure that it's sustainable and somewhat level going through. So it's not, varying constantly. And I don't remember if we have any more slides. Yeah. So that's kind of the overview, just to introduce why exactly we want to do a rework or look into the affordable housing program, see what changes we can make. Like I said, in the past, things just weren't very consistent. And like I said, when you have loans, grants, things like that, going into affordable housing projects, it's not good practice for it to be inconsistent and numbers essentially fluctuating. So.
Can you give just an example of what in your mind, like an unfair arrangement or contract would look like with a specific provider? Now, you don't have to name a provider, but what does it mean to be overly restricted or kind of an unfair deal versus the right kind of deal?
Yeah, 100%. And I have a tool that I'm able to use now to calculate this. And I'll show a couple examples, but essentially, if I were to give you $1 million, loan or grant, doesn't really matter, and you were to develop a 50-unit apartment complex. If I were to say that I'll give you that $1 million for free, but you have to restrict all 50 of those units to only take people that make 30% area median income. You have to do that for 20 years. Essentially, your the amount of possible income or possible revenue that you would make by not restricting that will far exceed $1 million. I don't even know how crazy of a number it would be, but it would probably be in the tens of millions of dollars for a 50-unit restriction to 30% AMI. So whenever I'm talking about something not being fair, is that it's not, if you do at least some kind of value of money calculation throughout a 20-year period, if it's not somewhere near break even, then it's probably either unfair to the county or unfair to the housing provider. So if, like I said, if you were to restrict like 50 units and I just give you $1 million, that $1 million is worthless to you because you're essentially signing your soul away with that property and losing over $10 million over those 20 years.
Some of our funding sources have restrictions, correct?
Right, yes.
And I think one of the bigger examples is just the ability to preserve and maintain the affordable housing. So kind of the scenario that Paul was talking about is there's not enough in a typical rental property, you have your rental reserves that you're retaining to be able to make the property improvements and upgrades on that. A lot of these projects there's not enough reserves or revenue coming in to be able to address that once you get into that year 15, 20 and beyond. So then those folks end up coming back to us and saying, we can't afford to fix the roof, the HVAC system, et cetera. So we need more funding. So part of what we're looking at is a model that says, let's give you the capacity and ability to have a more sustainable property, to be more supportive of those ongoing capital investments and needs. And so that we've got a lot of that. So that's more the inequity that we're seeing on some of these projects where they're just so over leveraged on the loan terms with us that we can improve that and also realize the value of a 30% unit coming in and the subsidy that's supporting that unit. There's a monetary value there as well. So I think in the past it's been more of your traditional business model that would say we must generate X amount of dollars for each unit to support it ongoing. And that just hasn't been the case in many of these properties that we've funded.
And do you have, so our current portfolio, you're saying has a mixture of loans and grants, but not kind of incentives?
Mostly loans.
Mostly loans. Do you have a list of all the projects and kind of the status of the investment?
Not the status of investment yet, but Ron, could you open up the next item on that list? It should be the list of units. Just to get an idea. So this past year or two has been probably the most productive in terms of adding units to our portfolio. I think we've got almost 100 units added over the past 24 months. So, oh yeah, because you have the PDF, huh? Okay, it might not work as well. So these are essentially, yeah, that's fine. These are essentially the if you have access to the Excel files, the list that's there, it's showing the average investment per unit and also the total amount of units that we currently restrict. So we're sitting at around 500 units. It's up almost 100 units over the past 24 months. But essentially, we have a new tool. You won't be able to open up any Excel files, will you?
I don't have any.
You don't have any? That's unfortunate. So one of the big reasons why we want to create a standard is because, as you can see, possibly from that historical unit count and historical average cost per unit, it's fluctuated quite a bit. But the goal with this investment tool that was created is to essentially stabilize that number of dollars invested per unit. Because if we're going in and essentially, like I said, throwing around numbers, you're going to have 1 year investing $150,000 per unit. Another year you'll have $35,000 per unit, and it makes no sense because from one point of view, you shouldn't have a business outlook on something like this because it is affordable housing. It's something that essentially is subsidized. But from the other point of view, we also should have the business outlook, meaning that we should create consistent standards and make sure that we're quote unquote looking at our return on investment, though it's not always monetary. So the non-monetary would be the public benefit of that. And Ron, do you by any chance know if you could open up the investment matrix? I think it's a Word document. That one shouldn't be messed up.
And we can share with you all the Excel documents afterwards as well.
And the reason I ask that is I would be interested personally to kind of see the portfolio laid out more specifically. I see some high level numbers, which is helpful. But I'd be curious to see, who are the providers, how much was invested, is that a grant, is it a loan? Things like that, so I don't know if that's something you have or could create, but it would help me a little bit to kind of see the universe of what are we talking about here with this
100%.
portfolio.
100%. And that, another thing is tomorrow I'll be returning to talk about the community frameworks loans, that I think were briefed about a month ago. But that will outline community frameworks portfolio with us. So I believe it's about 5 properties, and I'll be showing how the investments look. So those vary quite a bit. Some of them are extremely over restricted, some of them are not as restricted and technically with the accounting loss. So it'll be, I'm excited to show you those, but I might need to look into getting you that information because they're all Excel spreadsheets. But if you look on the screen, this is the investment matrix. This is just a Word document of it. The actual tool is an Excel document, and it just, you enter the numbers and it calculates how much units you need to restrict and how much profit or loss essentially the county gets. So these 4 bullet points are essentially what our return on investment is. So our return on investment, whenever we put in money, whether it's a grant or loan, it's the rental restrictions, which that's the public benefit. That's low income families that are able to get into properties if they're not making enough money to do market rent. That's our return on investment 1. Our second one is not exactly a direct return on investment from every property, but if we are getting loans paid back, our return would be the loan payment, and we get 10% of each loan payment as de minimis administration. So that's another return on investment. The third is a proposed new funding source, and this will be monitoring fees. I haven't mentioned this yet, but with our home dollars, essentially those are so highly restrictive of funds that whenever we invest it into something, we have a lot of compliance and monitoring that follows after that. The only way that I saw that we could get a very good return on those funds is by making monitoring fees for the properties. And a big problem that we've had with the portfolio, at least in the past, is that it's hard to sustain these properties. When you invest even $500,000 into a property, now they're on the hook for 20, 30 years, but we're also on the hook for federal compliance for those 30 years. That's administrative fees that we essentially incur. If we don't have enough home administration for that current year, we would have to use our sales and use tax document recording fees. So what's proposed is a monitoring fee for any future properties. And it would be approximately $100,000 per year. And those would not be restricted anymore. We essentially put $500,000 or $1 million into the property. From that money, they pay us back for the 20 or 30 years prorated monitoring fee. And we can hold that on a separate account to pay any future administration fees. So that's another proposed funding source for us for return on investment. And the fourth one is just the financing proceeds for the loan payments. So. Yes, sir.
So. What I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, is that for a project, instead of requiring, let's say they've got 100 units and we're going to kick in $2 million. And instead of us requiring that a whole 100 units have to be subsidized housing, we might say for $2 million, we're going to buy 25 housing units. So they're subsidized in the rest of the market.
Unless they have other public funders, which in most cases, that's how it goes. Is that we are a very small funder compared to Commerce, Finance Commission, HUD directly. Sometimes they have LIHTC invested into the properties. So I'll give you an example of one. We invested like $850,000 that will be paid on tomorrow about an item for Mirabu Place. That was an $850,000 investment. The total project, I believe, was 70 million or so. So or possibly 50 million. So we put in 1% of the entire project. It's a 300 unit project. If we restrict more than a couple percent, and that were to be a loan, well, it wouldn't exactly jeopardize the project, because if they have a lot of market rate, they could essentially subsidize. But if we're taking essentially 1% of the funding, but then we're turning around and saying you need to restrict 10 or 20% of the units, it makes no sense.
Right.
But that's how it was done previously. So now we look at it and we say, hey, what is the fair restriction? If it's a grant, then yes, maybe we should restrict 3 or 5% of the property because we're not getting monetary return. But if it's a loan, we definitely are not going to be restricting 10% of the units and call that a fair deal, because it's not. So that's essentially where the standardization comes in, where we have a tool that calculates it, makes it very easy. We drop the numbers in, calculate the years of rent loss. So that's already done, and like I said, that's an Excel spreadsheet. Fortunately, I couldn't show it to you today.
Thank you.
Just couple of quick comments. One, I love what Pavel and George are doing here because it's bringing some more consistency to how recommendations of consistency to how you all will look at these projects. To Commissioner Jordan's point, yes, there are restrictions based on our funders, but let's not be overly restricted. Let's stay within making it a sustainable business. And then when we think about returns, those returns allow the county to reinvest in projects. They're not just returns that are sitting there and allowing us to go do something else. It's allowing more, it's a revolving loan so that we have interest rates that are being generating yields that allows us to continue to invest in the future. So.
And then lastly, the hope is that as we clean this up, that we have more private market developers that are wanting to come to the table where we can have a percentage, a very small percentage of their overall project as a way to continue to expand our affordable housing, because if we rely on our nonprofits exclusively, we're never going to get there. So trying to make it more attractive, easier to do.
Thank you. Sorry I wasn't able to show you all of this stuff. There's so much, but it's all Excel spreadsheets. It's unfortunate.
Well, maybe you'll have to come back and be able to work us through it, right?
I'll bring back my laptop and try to connect to the TV.
That's
spreadsheets.
We'll bring full panels.
We'll work with you so that way maybe tomorrow.
Just send me the files beforehand.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, is it, we're kind of ready to get nice, but Randy, you guys are up next.
Sorry. Morning, Commissioners. This isn't our official budget rollout or anything yet, but we wanted to give you an update on the process. Where we're at in that process, we've received the asks back from the departments. We got those back a couple of weeks ago. We've been looking at them. We've also fine-tuned the revenue that we've got budgeted. And what we're finding, and I'll pass this out, this first sheet, this is our revenue. Oops. So what we're finding out is that our estimated revenue for 25 is going to be very close to what our budgeted revenue for 24 was. Not surprising, we're expecting sales tax to be flat. Property tax, we're budgeting a little bit less now because this year I'm budgeting basically on the collections based on uses. Last year we did not, so we might be tweaking this a little bit. Also, some of the money for property taxes goes to domestic, DD and mental health. And some of it also goes to TIFs. So this was just really looking at what the general. Yeah. So our starting point from a revenue side looks like it'll be about the same as last year, which when we did that projection back in February, this is very close to that number back then as well. On the expense side.
Yeah, so we're passing this out. I heard a piece of news last week that I thought was interesting. They were saying that RV sales are starting to pick up.
That's
And-
great news.
Well, and the news report, the financial report was saying that one of the indicators of a turnaround is RV sales. I thought, well, I've never heard that before. But I'll see if I can get the link for you.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, and so it was just last week and I thought, well, geez, Louise, maybe
Maybe I'm too low on sales tax.
well, or maybe people are buying RVs so they can leave the country. That could be too. So we just don't know. But
We did get notice, we do get advance warning from the state of Washington. And we are not expecting our August sales tax to be positive, let's say, based on the state's outlook. So the second sheet I passed out, and I know Ron has it on the screen, but I caught a bad number before we handed it out. This is just kind of the asks from the departments. And you see, you have the 22, the 23 actual, 24 budget, and the 25 department requests. And that line is with no vacancies included. So remember when we did the budget letter as a budget exercise, we said we're going to take all vacancies out because typically the general fund has about 120 to 150 vacancies every year. We took those out. And when we looked at that salary number with benefits, that was very close to what we also had projected in our projections this last February in our 5-year projections. So it's just kind of validated that if we keep running with the same amount of people that we seem to have open, that, you know, our projection at least was on point. What we did find in the requests this year is that maintenance and operations has increased. So if we were to do all the maintenance and or all the requests, we would need $264 million of revenue in 2025, and this is without capital. And we currently have 257 million, so we're about 7.7 million short. If we were to throw all those vacancies back in, because at any point in time, the vacancies you have may not be your realistic vacancy. You could have had someone leave the day before that magical date, but you've never had it open. But if we were to add all those back in, that would increase our shortfall by about $11.8 million. So we definitely, as a county, cannot afford all those vacancies, but where those vacancies belong or where the commissioners want them to belong, I mean, I think that is still a discussion we need to have. We just know we can't afford them all. But I think the blend of them may be incorrect. So as we get ready for September 3rd, which is the date that we need to present a budget to the commissioners, we're looking for some direction of how you want us to proceed. Now, one way we could proceed is, you know, the department heads, the elected officials, they know their business is this best. We could say if our revenue is only going to be what it was last year, we could say the starting point is this is your budget for next year, and what can't you do if you don't have that? i.e. additional requests of the board, and then the board could, you know, review all those requests and decide which ones they're going to do. That is one way.
We do have a department head and elected official meeting tomorrow, so we could present that to them there. Looking for any other options that you would like us to possibly do if we didn't do that one. Before our September 3rd. It's really why we're here. It's to kind of let you know where we're at, what else maybe you would like us to do. And the reason I'm thinking of taking it back to them is, you know, you could say to me, well, what's not required by statute? And I could pick something, but maybe that department head or elected official says, no, I'd rather do a cut here because that's really important. So, you know, us guessing, I guess, is not the best way to handle this. I think it's better to take it back to the people that actually know their department's tests.
Yeah, and I'd say, you know, after my first year, in 2018 was when we started the department head meetings, because we hadn't had those, and it was really surrounding the budget. Because we knew we were gonna have to make cuts, and so that was part of everybody, you know, kind of having these groups of internal departments of law enforcement, you know, public safety, you know, all of that. And part of it is like they came back with, you know, when the requests were coming in, they actually looked at them themselves as department heads amongst themselves to say who really had the request that was most important, most needed, versus everybody getting the request. And so that was the whole point of the department head, the retreat meeting. that we had.
Leader build retreats.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that was the whole point of them, was to do that and to break down those silos where people understood what each department was really doing and the importance of those areas. So I think it's gonna be departments, right? You're gonna bring departments together, you know, to really be looking at it holistically, just like we're gonna have to look at it holistically. You know, and again, kind of from a funding or a service group area. But that was how that all started and the whole point of those.
Thank you for
Back
that.
in 2018. I remember part of it from the internal perspective, but I mean, it's, you know, again, the department heads are gonna know best within their department, but then I think as they start to look at how their department interacts with other departments, seeing if there's efficiencies to be gained. And, you know, part of it's the new workday
Yes.
system, you know, what is that really gonna do? I mean,
And that's not gonna really help us until about 26.
Yeah.
So,
but if we don't start talking about it now.
correct.
And looking at what those positions that we shouldn't be filling, because that's gonna provide efficiencies. Yes, I mean, that's the only way that we think about it, if we look at it again holistically versus just isolating each moment. So. I mean, to me, at those leader build retreats, those are the things that we should be discussing now.
Slow. Can you just re-explain the two columns? The 2025 department request, no vacancies.
And then vacancies included.
Yeah.
So on July 19th, I believe was the date. June 19th. It was just from a budget standpoint, we just said any vacancies on that date will not be put in our original budget numbers. And we did that based upon the 5-year projection where we said, we don't think we can afford it. And this kind of proved it. So that total in that column, the 264 million, that is the budget asked for operating and maintenance plus no vacancies included. So all the vacancies are out of the budget. And that was that
As of that.
as of that date.
So the department request piece is the M and O.
Yes.
Not staffing.
Right, okay. And then the second column says, if we put all those vacancies back in, because we know at that date, that's probably not accurate for some departments. You know, if you had 5 people leave, 2 2 weeks before that, and those positions were vacant, but you had them being filled in 2 weeks. Or for example, the medical examiner has a vacant position, but we know they've hired an ME starting, or just started, but they were vacant at that date. We know that that's not reality. So we also know we can't afford it, but this is, if you left all the vacancies in there, that is what the budget would be. And it's really that difference. It's that 11.8 million. That is really what those vacancies are worth. And as we add some back or not, that is the value of those vacancies.
So for that second line, that ends with 275.
Yes.
When it says vacancies included.
So
is
all
that
vacancies-
only the vacancies that they requested.
No, that's
all that exists.
Yes, all that exists on paper. We were to add them all back and have that as a starting point like we have in the past before vacancy adjustments. That is what that number.
So when you've been having departments submit requests, right? Would there be a middle line that's that would reflect the specific positions that were?
We have not asked them to eliminate positions directly, so I don't have that in line. I do know some departments have said, I would not fill this position. For example, facility said there is one opening that I would not fill. We know we could take that out. I know Sheriff Knowles has said, I may give up this many because I needed to pay for X. But those have not been taken out of that second to last column.
And this is all, the 2025 vacancies included is all authorized
Yes.
positions. It's irrespective of any vacancy adjustment
Yes.
done last year.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It just kind of gets us to what are our side rails? And then being more constrained then by what is our revenue and where do we want to, how do we go back to the departments or the elected officials and what message do we give them next? I do have what each department, so oh yeah, we have their budget listed in there, so let's see what their budget is.
One of the clarities I wanted to add, Commissioner Jordan, with the M&O includes salaries. So in the 2015 department requests, no vacancies included, it includes salaries in there. It just has all position vacancies as of that June date eliminated, not funded. So I just want to make sure when we talk about M&O, it does include salaries. Well,
And extra help, chaos, and
it's
all the other
all of our
things.
expenses are except for capital.
It's everything but capital.
And if you were to roll in requested capital, it was 10 million.
Well, we had put in a placeholder also for the interest that we're getting from the other funds, but with that, it was a $10 million price tag for capital.
Yeah, so.
And there wasn't a lot of detail on that yet. So
Again, those are just requests. These don't reflect budget at all, but in trying to get to the preliminary budget that the commissioners will receive the first Tuesday in September.
2 weeks.
Tuesday?
2 weeks from tomorrow.
Yeah, 2 weeks from tomorrow. We would like to endeavor to give you at least an initial balanced budget. And then give the departments opportunities to come in and say, okay, if that's my budget, here are additional requests I have, or here's some of the things I wouldn't be able to do. So our suggestion would be, in order to get to that September, the cleanest way to do it is to go back and say 2024 is pretty close. Expenses for 2024 are pretty close to what our projected revenues are for 2025. We have about 0.5% increase in revenues. So we could use 2024 budgeted expenses, add 0.5% to each of the departments and give them a target and say, that's what you need to shoot for when you roll. That's what you can't go beyond that when you go and update your revised requests so that we can roll up a balanced budget on September 3rd. Something like that. It'd be the cleanest way to do it, and then they have the ability to go in there and make their choices. Do I want to invest in a little more headcount and reduce some of my M&O? Do I want to reduce some of my, they know their business the best, so giving them the discretion to be able to do it, but yet giving pretty clear direction as far as a target budget goes, I think would help get to a initial preliminary budget that shows expenses are not exceeding our projected revenues.
And then that would also then give you the ability to, if you needed to add more, wanted to add more, you could evaluate those things and do that in addition, if you decide to not to have, or as we're, maybe sales tax is gonna go up, but we could add another percent there or something like that. As we learn more, our revenue will keep getting fine tuned. So this is still fairly early in the year. We do expect to have some changes in revenue as we go forward. Don't expect it to be much, but I do expect some changes.
And you're wanting to possibly roll this out tomorrow at that elected.
That'd be
department
ideal,
meeting?
because then it gives them 2 weeks to go in and have their teams make the adjustments that need to make.
I'm fine with that. More advance notice, the better, so.
All right. Again, it's not the end, we're still at the beginning of the budgets. We just want to have a realistic one for you all to have and receive. And then you can talk about which departments you want to have come in, present requests, present their statutory versus non-statutory requirements, and have a better grasp of how things might roll forward. Choices that you want to make to move some funding around, you might prioritize here, deprioritize other areas.
When I think we'd want each department to be, they're gonna be doing that as they're going through this exercise, so I think we'd still want to see just get a copy of all of that and then make decisions as to which groups we want.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, the next item, we have 2 attorneys from California coming. That is Jennifer Emmel and Joseph Van Zandt. If I mispronounce their names, please excuse me. They're here to brief the board on the social media litigation that's ongoing at the present time. To be sure the board is fully briefed, and then possibly someplace down the road, the board may want to discuss an executive session if you're interested in participating in this litigation. So with the board's permission, I'll turn it over to Jennifer, and Mr. Valencia is going to pull up on the screen the information that was put in the board's briefing agenda for Jennifer to discuss with the board.
I'm trying to pull it up now and I can't. No, I'm just taking.
Oh, that was good.
And Jim, I just want to make sure that this is even though it's litigation, it's not, the county's not part of the litigation, so that's why it's.
That is correct, Madam Chair. This is an open session. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
So nice to meet you all. I'm Jennifer Emmel, which is my law partner, Joseph Van Zandt, and we are from Beasley Allen, law firm based in Montgomery, Alabama. We also have offices in Atlanta and Mobile, but we do national litigations as well. So we have we do toxic torts, mass torts, class actions, fraud, and we do represent government entities. Various cases that in which we've done that has been the BP oil cases, for example. We represent government entities in contamination cases, like water, environmental contamination, the opioid cases, also the Juul cases, the recent litigation, as well as things like Medicaid fraud. So we have represented, as I said, government entities, including states, counties, school districts, cities. And this case is a multi-district litigation. It's based in California. The federal litigation, the MDL, is based in the Northern District of California. And then we also have a consolidation of cases in the state court in California. And we have a lot of cases, actually more cases in the state court because all of the defendants are based in California. So all cases can be filed in either litigation. And Joseph is a co-lead for the plaintiffs in the state court litigation, as well as the liaison for the multi-district litigation. So we're in leadership in both litigations. And so I guess, well, about the cases themselves, it's based on harms to children and adolescents by social media companies. They target kids, they try and increase user engagement because that is where they get profits. So the longer the kids stay on the platforms, the more money they get in advertising. And so children suffer harms like eating disorders, suicidality, depression, anxiety, all very big public health concerns, and was illustrated in the Surgeon General's report just recently. So bringing that to a county, looking at the county point of view, it affects kids in schools, but it also affects it from a public health perspective in general. So you've got services, if you're providing funding to schools, that is one aspect of it. So counselors, additional training for teachers in schools, hotlines for the kids, behavioral facilities for as first responder crisis type centers, as well as just the other first responder services like ambulance services for the eating disorder and suicidality cases, clinics themselves, because a lot of these kids need ongoing treatment. And then from the sheriff's department and law enforcement point of view, law enforcement that have to go out in partnership with schools, as well as, additional strain on the juvenile detention system. And also the law enforcement, I don't know what Spokane's specific situation is, but some cities have had to increase cyber crime units. So they need to increase technology as well as investigation into cyber crimes, bullying, any kind of harms resulting on social media or with a social media and internet aspect.
And I'll just open them up.
Yeah.
Kind of on the broader aspect of this litigation. It started about 2 years ago. There was a former employee that left Facebook, Frances Haugen, testified in front of Congress, and she stole about 20,000 documents when she left, really showing how these companies have been intentionally targeting and knowingly harming children over the last several years. So this resulted in a pretty massive national litigation. Right now, there are over 1,000 individuals, young people who are suffering a whole variety of injuries. There are school districts that have filed a lawsuit. There are other cities and counties who have. There's also 40 state attorney generals who are litigating against these companies. So it's very similar, if you're familiar with the opioid litigation that's taking place in a lot of counties. It's very similar to the tobacco litigation, the Juul e-cigarette litigation that we just did. It's companies that are targeting, whether it's people, specifically children, with harmful and addictive products. This is nothing you inhale or take, but it's probably no one's surprised that social media can be harmful and addictive to children. And it's really the fallout that takes place because of it. Especially school districts or counties or any entity that's providing support, mental health support, any type of health support through health departments to children. There's going to be additional costs that governments incur because of that. So this is probably one of the largest litigations of this type right now in the country, and it's just something that is very not political right now. It is something on both sides of the political aisle. There's been congressional hearing one after another in comments about what these companies are doing. So what we're focusing here on is Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, which has this whole host of other problems, international included, and they're currently under federal investigation. The federal government is actually litigating against them. Snapchat, YouTube, so really all the social media companies that you can imagine might be impacting children. So we've used this litigation model, as Jennifer mentioned, a lot of different fronts. fronts, and most recently with the Juul e-cigarette. This is very similar to that, a company that's intentionally targeting young children. And in that case, that was really against big tobacco, although it was a startup company in San Francisco. We tried a case on behalf of the San Francisco United School District there, and the litigation settled during that trial. But it resulted in it's confidential, but a very, very good settlement on behalf of all the school districts and government entities that participated in that litigation. I don't know if the county here has participated in similar litigations as plaintiffs before. So if so, you understand probably kind of what it entails. And oftentimes these are what we refer to as mass tort litigations. So, there may be thousands of plaintiffs or hundreds of counties or cities that participate, and there are a few that get selected to be the bellwether plaintiffs. And those that get selected end up having to do more work. There's obviously it's more one-on-one litigation and discovery. I know, past budgets, time is a big problem for government agencies, so you're probably concerned about the timing that would take. So there can often be a lot of active litigation involved if you are selected for that bellwether case. If not, then a lot of times what can happen is there's some work, some forms that have to be litigated, but if and when there is a settlement, that's when the county would be able to get recovery through that settlement. So there's certainly a chance that you would have to actually litigate this head on, but percentage-wise, it's something that most likely it wouldn't take up huge amount of time and resources, but would be a way to essentially get the county additional funding down the road to address this issue.
The board has been involved in the opioid litigation and also the Monsanto litigation. And we were either active members of the class or they were made a part of the class by the federal courts themselves. So I'm wondering if it would be helpful, Commissioner, if they went through the screen up there and kind of went through there, or if the board has questions. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
I was just wondering how bellwethers are selected in these types of cases.
Yeah, so really each case is different how that works. And so like right now we have a federal court and a state court component of this. In the state court, we're focusing on personal injury cases of individuals, and they're the selection for the random. The judge kind of put these structures in place and selected them randomly. In the federal court, it was done by party picks. So the plaintiffs selected a few, the defendants selected a few. And right now, the bellwethers that have been selected there are individuals and school districts. So there are not any government entity outside of school districts like cities and counties that have been selected. It's really kind of a growing part of litigation, or cities and counties getting involved. School districts were very much involved from the beginning. And so there's not really a structure or a trial schedule or a bellwether selection process for cities and counties.
Just before you go, because we talked to our community services director and with our student wellness initiatives and our teen text line and all those things are happening. And I know talking to the sheriff as well, but yes, our cyber crimes that I think they've added. I don't know, I did the real time crime center today, so I'll ask when I'm over there. But yeah, I think there's definitely been additional costs and just knowing how the algorithms work for these companies that once they start, it just really does target. I was just in a meeting with a group on youth mental health leaders. They were saying that the recommendations not to get kids any kind of cell phone until 16 at least. But we're all doing it or doing it because as a parent you want to be able to know where your child is and your child can get a hold of you. I think our school district 81 is looking at Spokane School District, their largest, is doing a no cell phone policy during class, to try to help stop this. So it's a significant issue in any community.
And really the damages in cases like this, there's really two components of it. One part of it is, like you mentioned, the increased expenses you've already faced over the last several years. And so that's a number that can be ascertained. But another part of what we're seeking here is really abatement damages. So what resources and funding would government entities need to continue to abate this problem moving forward, putting in classes or additional funding for different resources. So it's both backward looking damages and forward looking damages that would be how the damage model would be.
And your point on technology, what I've seen in other cities has been not only the addition of the technology and the implementation, but also personnel and training. So, I mean, and additional personnel. So it's definitely a huge aspect of it.
Few questions. What Washington jurisdictions are engaged at this point? Washington State, and then you mentioned kind of California cases. Are there other cases, or have they all been kind of consolidated into a more limited number? What's the kind of lay of the land across the country?
Yeah, so all the cases are really consolidated in California. So that's plaintiffs all around the country. So the federal cases are all consolidated in front of one judge in Oakland, the Northern District of California. That's the federal component. And so they're all still individual cases, probably what you're used to with opioids or what you're familiar with, but they consolidate all there for one judge to manage. But also, this is interesting, all these companies are based out of California, so they can also be sued in California state court. So there's a separate California consolidation in Los Angeles. That's where I'm co-lead counsel of that litigation. But that's also plaintiffs all around the country as well, state. Because in any state, so county from Washington can sue them in that California state court because that's where those companies are located. So that's really, we talk about the California litigation, but these are national litigations that just really so happens to be where they're centered. So, for example, if a county or school district here in Washington filed a lawsuit, even if filed it in federal court in Washington, it would get transferred there. That's the way they have it set up.
For example, the Washington AG has also gone in with the other AGs in the consolidated.
This is a complicated, widespread litigation, very similar to opioids. I mean, you have private plaintiffs, the federal government, state governments all around the country litigating this. So it's certainly a real problem and be kind of a complicated litigation, but there's certainly, I think it's important for any school district, county, city that's feeling the impact of this to get it on. So really, that there's really only upside for that. Yeah, having litigated before, you understand kind of the contingency fee basis of it, of how, there's no financial risk for the county to participate in litigation other than the time that might be involved if the case is selected, that's going to be worked up. But otherwise, our firms, our team of firms, we front all the litigation expenses. So, I mean, there's really only upside. If there's a settlement or a good result down the road, then it's something that we benefit from. If not, if we litigate this for 5 years and it turns into nothing, the county is not out anything financially.
This is one of the cases that is actually moving fairly quickly because of all the nationwide support, not only from the public, but also surprisingly, it's one of the few issues that has bipartisan support. So that's helpful also.
Commissioner Kinney, one of the same questions that you had, that Commissioner Jordan asked, I was thinking about too. Number one, you haven't had any conversations with the Washington State Association of Counties, because I called over there thinking that other counties might be interested in. To the best of my knowledge, you haven't, and that was one of the first questions I asked. The second question I asked, and Jennifer responded, are there any other counties or cities in the state of Washington which have decided to participate in this litigation? And I think you shared with me there are not any, at least presently speaking. And with regard to the Monsanto litigation, the county was offered the opportunity to participate early on. We decided not to. Instead, the city of Spokane was the lead agency, but it was determined to be a class action. And even though we didn't participate, we did participate in recovery in a neighborhood of $3.7 million. So I think I heard you say that at the present time, these are individual lawsuits and there's no class action. Would you be expecting that one of either the state judge or the federal judge, there might be a motion for a class action in this regard, and directly or indirectly, the counties and the state of Washington might be involved?
We don't anticipate this becoming a class action.
Okay.
There's various reasons for that. And what happened with the Monsanto, it can be complicated. A lot of times these can be individual cases until it's time for settlement. Then they'll possibly do like a settlement class action. That's an effort to try to bring in all the other cities and counties that might not have participated in order for the defendants to get finality for a settlement. But otherwise, our firms, our team of firms, we front all the litigation expenses. So, I mean, there's financially, there's really only upside for that. If the case is selected, that's going to So whether that would be done here or not would be yet to be determined. But this would not really meet the standards of being a class action, because each county, cities, their damages possibly be so different. So in terms of litigation, it would be individual. But again, individual consolidated with hundreds of additional cases makes sense. So, right now, for example, the personal injury plaintiffs, there are over 1,000 plaintiffs, and 22 of them have been selected to be bellwethers and to go through actual discovery. All the other plaintiffs have only had to complete a plaintiff fact sheet and answer questions about litigation. So it's, you're kind of on the peripheral of the litigation where you're right in the center of it. And so that's something that you can't control. The judges really set that up differently. There are other cities and counties that are litigating, none that we know of here in Washington, and we have to provide you a list of other cities and counties, like, for example, New York City and they have filed a large case against the social media companies. So we can get you a list of cities and counties that are. I know there are school districts here. I know the Spokane School District, I believe, is already participating as a school district in litigation. There's other, Seattle, one of the first school districts we filed suit. So there are certainly other Washington entities. But this has been in the beginning, it's been very heavy with individuals and school districts. And really, school districts, we just finished Jewel, a very successful litigation for schools around the country. So the school districts were very quick to want to win this one as well, given that experience. But we are seeing now cities and counties kind of be in the newer area where you're seeing more involvement.
And I think we just had a history of having more school districts because it's a child and adolescent sort of targeting aspect of it. And so people looked at the school districts, but I think a lot of people were not looking at the funding behind some of the school districts and the other funding that goes along in terms of community resources that are needed. So I think like cities and counties just didn't realize that they could also recover. And I think are just beginning now to realize that this is a case where they actually probably have more damages than the school districts.
Commissioner French.
I did. Interesting that Seattle, which is clearly one of the hubs for social media, is now suing because of social media. There's an irony in that for me, so just an observation.
Well, again, we're not anti-social media, we're not anti-internet. It's just the way that it is being implemented. I mean, there are things that could be done that could make it safer for kids and adolescents. So it's just getting those things implemented.
Well, yeah, it's been the Wild West, legally speaking, for these companies for far too long. They've had federal protection under a statute called Section 230, which we've been able to kind of put some kinks in the armor on that over the last few years and find some ways to hold them accountable, although that's still a fight because they're claiming full immunity to essentially do whatever they want. But to your point, the executives of these companies don't allow their own children to use their products. They don't allow them to use social media. TikTok has a Chinese version of TikTok, which they allow their citizens to use. And we have to have another one that they allow US citizens to use. So it's there's certainly hypocrisy. People who are putting this out there for the public to digest aren't willing to put their own kids on this stuff. So we're hoping this litigation will not only result in meaningful compensation for those that get involved and litigate, but also help bring about some real change. And again, with Congress looking heavily into this, there's great legislation that's pending right now, and hopefully bring some better changes. Like you mentioned, the 16-year-old, right now, social media companies, the only federal law that says is that you're not supposed to allow anyone under age 13 on the platforms. And really the way they get around that is they just don't have any age verification. So you can go there and put whatever date of birth you want on these platforms. So we're hoping to see some positive changes with legislation, but also with the attorney generals. Now, my mind goes back to the tobacco litigation back in the early 90s, which a lot of states participated in, to where, there have been really no regulations on tobacco companies, and it's litigation that really brought about the most immediate change. So we know how politics can work. We know how Congress can work. We feel like as attorneys, we're playing a small role in this. One way to hold these companies accountable is for juries. But again, there's challenges involved with that as well. So if it's something you're interested in hearing more about, we'd be happy to provide any additional information to you, meet with any key individuals that may be impacted by this in different departments, and kind of have a further discussion about how it's specifically impacting Spokane and think a way forward on this would be in terms of seeking compensation for that.
I know Commissioner CUNY, that Chris Anderson, who is the chief civil deputy, and he did invite other county departments and electeds to participate, but their schedules wouldn't accommodate that. So it may very well be, if the board's interested in moving forward, that we want to have some sort of a Teams meeting or some sort of internet meeting so we can further explore what we're talking about here. One of the questions that always I think about is, if the Attorney General of the state of Washington has initiated litigation, I assume they're looking at state damages, and of course, they would not include damages to Spokane County if we were to involve in a separate litigation. Is that to your understanding?
That is, and that can get complicated in different litigations. So go back to opioid, for example, there were some states to where attorney generals had claims, counties had claims, and when it came time for settlement, the attorney generals essentially said, well, no, we got you covered, don't worry. And so that's not always the case. As it stands right now, the claims that the attorney general is seeking are very different from those that counties, cities, and schools are seeking. The attorney generals are mostly litigating these, not privacy actions, but unfair business practice conduct. There's COPPA, federal statute that, so it's more dealing with it on a population statewide basis, and there are statutory penalties for certain conduct that the companies have done, as opposed to specifically dealing with increased budgets and abating damage. So there are differences. They're not really complaints. They're not really the same case. It's about the same conduct. But the attorney generals are coming in right now and essentially trying to recover for everyone possibly impacted in the entire state.
It's more of a consumer protection on behalf of the states. And, you know, and we've had this in other litigations where we've had school districts versus counties versus cities, and they all have their own separate damages, and that they're all able to show their separate damages, where the funding is coming, and how they're impacted differently.
Madam Chair, if the board, county commissioners, the county were interested in moving forward in this regard, are there any statute limitations that we need to be aware of so we could coordinate with you and the board to make timely decisions?
Yeah, so that's certainly fact specific. So I think really the next step would be for us to kind of have those more detailed conversations with the county about the impacts when those started. But what we're seeing right now in terms of statute limitation is this really falls in the category of a continuing. So this is not one thing that happened 5 years ago. This is happening every single day until they really start to change their conduct. So that really relieves some pressure that you might be able to see.
And one of the theories of recovery is nuisance. Does that give us the ability to go back beyond the statute of limitations for a tort as far as recovery of damages, if I stated that correctly?
Generally speaking, yes. Again, it would be fact specific, but for public usage, for instance, I mean, it would be it's an ongoing continuing use. It's not something, you know, like a BP oil spill that we did. That was a pretty defined event area, where this is something that's just continuing. So again, we have to kind of get into the specifics and discuss that with the different departments. Make sure we have a good factual basis for what potential challenges there could be. But if something the county's interested in hearing more about, we'd be happy to speak further as you're talking about. We could dig in and kind of do some preliminary investigation specific to Spokane County here first, and then if we feel comfortable, you feel comfortable, we could decide to move forward. And once you retain our group, we would continue that investigation. And again, we would investigate it, present it all to you, and let you know whether or not we believe you should or should not move forward in filing a case. We're certainly not going to waste anyone's time if we start digging in and we think, well, you've not been impacted at all. Don't suspect that's the case, but we give you that option before we actually initiate the litigation. Or that based on what we found, you're comfortable moving forward. If then and only then proceed to file a lawsuit and begin litigation.
And how quickly are you looking for a decision?
Yeah. We certainly, you don't want to wait too long with these types of things. I would say certainly the next 2 or 3 months, I think it would be a good target to kind of have these further conversations and decide if it's something you want to move forward on. This is still, the landscape of this litigation is ever changing, and there's still outstanding decisions we're waiting on from the judges that could possibly impact what calls of action are or not available. We expect a decision from the federal judge on that really any day. It could be this week, next. So once that decision comes down, that will have a big impact on government entities. So that's, we really would wait, we would need that decision before we would even file a complaint, essentially, because that's going to, it's deciding a lot of very big picture issues on public nuisance cases as it relates to government entities. So once that decision comes down, we would be prepared to move forward. But I would think the next 2 or 3 months would be a good time frame where it's not a major rush, but it's not something you want to let just sit out there, 6 months or a year.
Especially given the speed of the litigation, how the courts are pushing it forward. So we probably want to, get started on preparing a complaint for you. And we want to talk to those key personnel, like, there's a Spokane County Community Services, someone from there, someone from the sheriff's office.
So that's what I'm thinking over the next month, that we would need, we would kind of task our CEO to do that, to see what the cost, what the costs we're expending, and all of that, and kind of get that information for us to then know to, us make a decision, how we go, further there as we make.
I think Chairman Kearney, what you're saying is, if you sat down with these department heads and elected that are impacted by the legislation, we'd have a better idea what our damages might be, and it was worthwhile in proceeding. I think so, so they have better understand it, and then we can delve deeper into what the recovery might be to see if the board is interested in moving forward. I think that's what I'm hearing Commissioner Kearney say and the other board members.
That's how we would suggest to proceed. As you mentioned earlier, sometimes you hear these litigations or the litigations happen, you don't have to be involved, all of a sudden you get an opportunity to sign up at the end and get participate in the settlement. That doesn't always happen. So, that didn't happen in opioids, that didn't happen in Jewel, for example. We had in the same county, one school district participated, we got substantial compensation, the other school district didn't, and which they had. So, if I could sit here and tell you, hey, you don't need to do anything, one day you get to recover, I would, but that's not always, the best way to ensure that is actually to be involved.
And I think we saw that opioid settlement case too, the ones that actually signed on early, and more recovery dollars coming through the state, so, yeah.
And in Monsanto, the lawsuits, the counties and cities that actually were lead entities, they did recover not only the standard amount, but they got their attorney's fees and all sorts of other items involved in that. So they're all a little bit different.
Yeah, and then, bellwethers is a lot of work, but also the bellwethers generally recover a lot more if it's going to trial, getting a verdict, or even in a settlement. The extra work and time put into it is generally recognized. So in Jewel, we had several clients that were bellwethers, and moving forward to this litigation, they're all asking, how do we get bellwethers again? Despite the work into it, they really felt like it was worth their time and what they recovered.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming all the way here to Spokane. Hopefully you're enjoying your time here.
It's my second time. I love Spokane.
Haven't been since law school, and I realize I miss it.
Oh, wow.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Okay, well, Chris will be back in touch then.
Right, and we'll, yes, I'll mention this to Chris, and then we'll work with Scott Simmons to have a Teams meeting with the affected department heads and elected officials and follow through.
Perfect. Thank you. We do have an executive session. You're like ready to go, and
I am.
we're trying to make sure that you guys, if you look at the agenda, that as it comes out to you, maybe have your assistants close to, because we're trying to make sure that you're aware of executive sessions, so that way you can plan for it in your calendar. So just thanks, Scott and I are trying to work on that on the agenda as we set the agenda, so that way we know what it's like.
Yeah, we're trying to make sure on the Friday when Shelley or Gina sends out the agenda, there's a note out there that shows, hey, we're expecting to have 1, 2, 3, whatever, and here's a time that we're thinking about having.
So is there any miscellaneous items? Because that takes us to the end of our actual agenda. Is there any other miscellaneous items to come before us?
We need a check-in for PIO. I know it's Mark Luke just left, but
Or we can do, I don't think Pat's out this week. We can do tomorrow as well if I'd like to. But
no big deal.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, because it might be nice tomorrow just to get an update on how that whole scraps event
Oh, sure. Yeah,
this weekend.
that's good.
So the teams approved, provided over you. Part of them might have it as well.
Okay. Another miscellaneous items then, so, is there?
Madam Chair, I have two executive session items. They're pending potential litigation. My sense is one will take no longer than 10 minutes. The other should take no longer than 5 minutes. I do not expect the board to take any formal action with respect to either one of the executive session items. The first executive session item, I would request that, of course, Larry Haskell is here to present that particular item. He deals with pending potential litigation. Also, Larry would ask that the board members be present for that, Scott Simmons, if you will, and the risk manager, Mr. Gadd. The second, yeah, I saw him. The second item is also a pending potential litigation item. This is just an update for the board, no action. With regard to this particular item, the same parties can participate if they like, and it should be very short. So total time, probably no more than 15 minutes at the most, no action expected on either item.
And then at the end of that executive sessions, we will adjourn for the day. It is now 11:36. So we'll be in executive session for approximately 15 minutes. No action, and so then we will adjourn for the morning at that point in time. Oh. Wait, something else.
Cheers.
Or still good with
Josh, I
Thursday?
don't think, I didn't announce your name. I apologize. I think Commissioner Cooney, no one from HR was going to be involved in either one of these, just Mr. Simmons.
Yes, I guess my understanding is like the report was
Yeah.
asked by risk management, and so. You know, Mr. Simmons
Yeah.
is here first.
Yeah, exactly right. That was my understanding, Madam Chair. So there's a, okay, so. Be sure we'll put out the room.